All right. Good day, everyone. My name is Scott Leezer, and I'm here with the Honor the Gift Coalition. And I just want to take care of a few housekeeping matters before we go ahead and get started. First, the webinar today is being recorded and will be distributed to all registrants after the webinar, including the Honor the Gift Coalition members. Secondarily, this recording and all the remarks are off the record, and those individuals are only representing themselves and not their offices or their boss's opinions. And there will be a Q&A period at the end of the webinar. And if you would like to submit a question, please do so by using the chat function at the bottom of the screen and select all attendees and panelists. And with that, I will hand it over to Peter Maag.
Thank you so much, Scott, and a warm welcome. My name is Peter Maag. I'm the Chairman and CEO at CareDx. We're supporting the Honor the Gift Coalition, and it's an amazing coalition that came together. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to join today's webinar. For some of you, that has been a very, very long period that working on the Immuno bill. Without further ado, one of the great coalition partners is really NKF, and so thank you very much for Kevin Longino. Over to you, Kevin.
Hi, thank you, Peter. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Scott. And on behalf of everyone here at the National Kidney Foundation, as well as our friends at the Honor the Gift Coalition and the American Society of Nephrology, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. We're here to talk about the Comprehensive Immunosuppressive Drug Coverage for Kidney Transplant Patients Act of 2020. Quite a mouthful. So that's why it's commonly known as the Immuno bill, and that's how we'll be referring to it for the rest of this presentation. Now, this legislation has been a priority for the NCAF for a long time, and for many, many others in this room. You know, when I first joined the NCAF as a volunteer 12 years ago, this bill was one of the first issues I ever advocated for. In fact, I met with a freshman congressman from Connecticut, and quite frankly, he didn't believe this was an issue. And yet when he came back around and said, wow, this is amazing, we have to do something. So given that kind of history, and given that this is effectively a no-brainer bill, it's encouraging to see that we've got the momentum that we've gained during this Congress, and we're really grateful for that. So we want to thank the support that we've gotten from the Department of Health and Human Services, a great coalition of champions in Congress, and a passionate, united group of community advocates like yourself. We've never been this close to getting the Immuno bill passed. But that said, we still need your help to make sure the job gets done, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So during this webinar, we're going to talk about the importance of the Immuno bill and how the kidney and transplant community has supported it over the years and what it means. We're going to talk about how the Immuno bill has progressed through the 116th Congress, through this Congress. And then finally, we're going to wrap up and talk about how you can take action to support this critical legislation and help us get it across the finish line. But before I hand it back over to Scott to introduce our next speaker, I want to take a second and welcome and honor some very special guests that we have joining us today. So Nick Uehlecke, a very passionate kidney disease patient advocate from the administration. He is an advisor at the Office of Immediate Secretary at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Rob Butora, who's a health policy advisor for Senator Bill Cassidy out of Louisiana, and Alex Eveland, legislative director for Representative Ron Kine. So we're also pleased to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Barbara Murphy. Dr. Murphy is the Murray M. Rosenberg Professor of Medicine and Department Chair of the Mount Sinai Health System. She's also a counselor with the American Society of Nephrology. And then lastly, you've already met Peter Maag, Chairman and CEO of CareDx. Back to you, Scott.
Thank you. You know, actually, Dr. Murphy had something else come up, so we are going to go to Zach Kribs, who's going to give us a little bit of background on Congress's commitment to the ESRD community. Zach? Zach, I think you're muted.
Hazards of having multiple mutes. I look forward to an age past COVID-19. Thank you, Scott, and thank you to everyone joining today for this very critical conversation. And again, my apologies on behalf of Dr. Murphy. Briefly covering some of the history of this important issue. In 1972, Congress made a commitment to cover the treatment of patients with kidney failure, also known as end-stage kidney disease, through the end-stage renal disease special benefit. This means basically that Medicare will cover the cost of hemodialysis or a kidney transplant, regardless of a patient's age or income. While this has greatly expanded the number of therapies that are available to kidney patients, including kidney transplants, there is also a key portion of this talking today where Medicare covers the cost of immunosuppressive medications for 36 months after kidney transplant, after which patients are on their own to cover the cost of the immunosuppressive medications. Without strict adherence to immunosuppressive medications, patients can face serious health consequences, such as the loss of their transplanted kidney, as well as other serious health concerns. So this means once a patient loses their kidney, that they would have to return to hemodialysis and the kidney transplant wait list to try to obtain a second transplant. And both of these therapies would be covered by Medicare and are considerably more expensive than the cost of the immunosuppressive medications themselves. Critically, the advent of these generic immunosuppressive medications, which we'll touch on a little later in this conversation, have driven down the cost of these critical immunosuppressive drugs considerably since the immunosuppressive drugs and transplant surgery was really first arrived on the scene. I believe I went back and dug through the data. In some form or fashion, Congress has been attempting to address paying for immunosuppressive medications in every Congress since 1986. This, and on a very bipartisan basis, I should add. So this is a critical issue that's been of great importance to Congress, but I think up until this moment now, it's been cost prohibitive to extend the coverage of immunosuppressive medications. So switching to the next slide here, a couple important facts to highlight. Despite the introduction of generic immunosuppressive medications, more than 70% of U.S. kidney transplantation programs have reported that their patients have difficulties paying for immunosuppressive medications. So this means this is a pretty widespread problem across the entire United States of patients who are unable to pay for their immunosuppressive drugs and face loss of their kidney graft. In May of 2019, our incredible partners at the Department of Health and Human Services released a report that outlined some estimates for how Medicare insured kidney transplant recipients would lose their grafts, their kidney transplant, due to a lack of continued immunosuppressive medication coverage. And basically they found that in 2015, the last year that we have complete data from, approximately 375 Medicare patients needlessly lost their transplanted kidney. So this is a real problem. These are real people behind these numbers, but it is still a fairly limited universe of individuals who are unable to afford immunosuppressive medication coverage. We have also seen evidence of how Medicare's current policies impact marginalized communities. Black Americans have faced significant racial disparities in obtaining and maintaining kidney transplants for as long as there have been kidney transplants, and these problems persist today. I think it's important to note, while there aren't complete data about loss of immunosuppressive, inability to afford immunosuppressive medications and race disparities on that issue, I think there are very significant disparities in this space. Black Americans, according to the study from 2017, were 62% more likely to experience loss of their kidney grafts, their transplanted kidney, than their white counterparts. And this number jumps to 93% after 5 years post-transplant. And definitely maintaining strict adherence to immunosuppressive drug medications is a critical piece of this. So it's important that we ensure that all Americans can afford critical immunosuppressive medications, both to increase the wellness of our patients and also to help reduce some of these intense disparities in kidney transplantation. Troy, I'll hand it back over to you for the next session.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Zach. As Zach mentioned, this has been a decades-long fight to do this. I started with the Kidney Foundation over 20 years ago. And at that time, in 1997, there was a bill that had been introduced. And I actually looked it up yesterday because I knew it had at least 50 to 100 co-sponsors. And it was the House legislation had 81 co-sponsors. Amazingly, 7 of whom are still in office in the House, and 3 of whom are now in the Senate. And there was a Senate bill as well. The Democratic champion of that bill was Senator Durbin, who, as you know, is still championing the issue now and has done so for every year. So this, as I said, this was introduced over 20 years ago, and as Zach alluded, actually they were, the Congress started looking at this in the 1980s. And at that time, initially, the benefit for the transplant recipients lasted only 12 months post-transplant. So they lost all their Medicare and their immunosuppressive coverage after 12 months, and then Congress expanded that to 36 months in the early 1990s, and it's been stuck there 36 months post-transplant ever since. But there's never been any disagreement among members of Congress, bipartisan, that there needs to be legislation to fix this. Congress understands that, as Zach said, providing for the transplant, paying for the transplant, paying for dialysis, but not paying for the medications that are necessary to help reduce the likelihood of organ rejection, kidney rejection, is just short-sighted. So it's, they've always recognized that it's foolhardy not to cover it. The payback period, so to speak, for Medicare is about 3 years. So if a transplant is doing fine after about 2.5 to 3 years, it's cost effective compared to, compared to dialysis. So they've always agreed that there's been this need, but the problem has been, it's always had a price tag to it. There's always been a net cost according to the Congressional Budget Office. So despite the fact that it's had that widespread support, the legislation, gets anywhere from 40, 50 to 100 some co-sponsors every year in the House, depending on which Congress it is. It always has strong support in the Senate. But despite that fact of that broad bipartisan support, it's been near impossible to pass because of the price tag. So what makes this year so much different is the Congressional Budget Office about a month ago determined that there'd be a net savings. Over a 10-year period, if the bill was enacted, would provide a net savings of about $70 million to Medicare. So that removes any financial barriers to doing this. We're very optimistic about moving forward on it throughout the rest of this year, given the strong support not only from the congressional people that are on this call today, but the administration as well, which Nick will speak to. It's got support from everybody in the transplant community, the patient community, professional communities, etc. And the main reason why the price tag has come down is, I believe Zach alluded to this as well, is generics are more widely available now, and it's really driven down the cost, the per person cost for this benefit under Medicare Part B. And with that, I'll turn it back to Alex and Scott. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Zach, for that background. Now, without further ado, we're going to introduce some of the officials and recognize the folks who are working behind the scenes to really put this issue forward and move it through the legislative and administrative work that needs to be done to enact this policy. And so I will introduce first Nick Uehlecke from the Office of the Immediate Secretary at HHS to speak about the support from the administration. Nick?
Thanks, Scott, and thank you everybody for having me on this call. Excited to gear up on the kidney work again, it's been a trying 4 months here, but really excited to continue my work with everybody on the call related to kidney-related issues, particularly this one. I have to start with a little bit of a disclaimer, so forgive me that that my comments are off the record, and these are my thoughts, not those of my superiors. Just our rules, I guess. I just want to start, when I came over to the department last year, early last year, I brought with me a few of the priorities that I'd been working on for years with colleagues in the House. And one of them was this concept of paying for immunosuppressive drugs past the 36-month deadline that we have today. And so happy that that my former colleagues on the Hill and their compatriots over there continue to carry this torch to where we are today. You know, when we got here, obviously, as brought up by Troy and others, the Congressional Budget Office, and, you know, we have this issue. This issue is one that, you know, really mires a couple of very important issues. I'm sure that folks are dealing with this now with telehealth as well. But when the Congressional Budget Office tells you that something costs a lot of money, it makes it a lot more difficult to get something passed, regardless of how much support you have. So, you know, we here at the department have multiple resources where actuaries outside of the Congressional Budget Office, obviously, also make estimates. And in gearing up for what became the Advancing American Kidney Health Initiative, I spoke to my colleagues at our research arm, ASPE, as well as the actuarial office and our CMS, and asked that they take a look at this in preparation for the kidney event to see if we could get an analysis that showed that this would save dollars. We got to that point. We were very glad to share that with our colleagues in Congress to continue that push. And then the next step to that was getting this policy into the president's budget. You know, the secretary is, you know, one of his top priorities is the Advancing American Kidney Health Initiative. Everything that was promised in the executive order last July. We're actually creeping really close here to a one-year anniversary of the announcement. And so it's really great to be on the phone with you all as we prepare for that as well. But, you know, he supports this to get passed. I know that we've been working, our teams have been working closely with the congressional staff on technical assistance so that the legislation can be ready to move forward. Again, you know, very excited. This has been a years-long project. I think for a few minutes earlier, we were recounting how many members had been involved in pushing this ball along over the course of the last few years. And so very excited for this to happen. You know, I think amongst all the great things that we're able to do in government, you know, this is definitely one that will directly affect people's lives, and very much excited to be a part of it. Again, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to working with all of you going forward.
Thank you, Nick. Next up, we will turn it over to Alex Eveland from Representative Ron Kine's office, his legislative director, for an update on the House action. Alex?
Great. Thanks, Scott. And thanks for Nick, to Nick and at HHS and to everyone else on this call who's been working really hard on this. It's very exciting to see this bill moving forward, have a lot of momentum. And so, you know, after you know, decades of working on this, it's exciting to be hopefully close to the finish line. So I'm recently, you know, relatively new to this compared to a lot of people on this call. I've been working on this bill for about 4 years now. Congressman Kine, who I work for, has been working on this with Dr. Burgess in the House and others for about 10 years now. So it's something that's really important to him. And as others have mentioned before me, you know, this is just a no-brainer when you talk to folks about the policy. And so it makes it, you know, on one hand, it makes it easy for us to be able to gather support, which we've shown. We've got over 60 co-sponsors in the House. And the ball is moving forward, as I mentioned. So there's the CBO score. Obviously, it was a big deal, showing that this is going to save money, which we knew for a long time. We just needed that official word from the Congressional Budget Office. So once we had that, we knew that this would be, you know, we could start moving forward on this, which we're currently in the middle of. So in the House. As I mentioned, Dr. Burgess, who's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, has been working with his counterpart, Congresswoman Eshoo from California, who's the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee, and they have been moving this bill through the committee process, which is in the middle of right now. So they have kind of a 3-step process. Or next week we are hopefully going to have the last step in the committee process, where the Energy and Commerce Committee does a full committee markup of the bill, and so hopefully once that happens and everything's successful, we will move the bill out of the committee, and it will be ready for a vote on the full floor. So we're hoping that can happen here in the coming months. You know, and then once we get through the House, hopefully this bill will be smooth sailing through the Senate. And so my colleague Rob with Senator Cassidy's office and Senator Durbin's office as well has been really helpful. We've been in lockstep on this, moving it forward. And so, yeah, hopefully we can get this done in the next couple months, because it's been a long time coming, and the policy is the right thing to do. And as Nick mentioned, it's going to make a big difference in people's lives. And so that's what it's all about. So yeah, thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone for their grassroots support, and hopefully we can continue that, because it really does help when members of Congress hear from folks in their district about why this is important. Personal stories are really important. So thank you for everyone for sharing those, for being involved, and for all your help on this. So thanks again, and let's try and get this over the finish line.
Thank you, Alex. And then lastly, I'll hand it over to Rob Butora to talk about the momentum that we've seen in the Senate. Rob? Rob, you're also muted. On your phone? While Rob figures that out, I'm gonna, oh, Rob, are you there?
Rob, if you can dial *6 on your phone, that'll unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Do you hear me now?
We do. We do hear you, Rob. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that. I had a technical glitch, but my apologies. Yeah, just I'll keep this short and sweet. I want to thank everybody, all the advocates, for doing all the hard work and getting members on board. We've had a nice surge in Senate co-sponsors in the last couple of weeks, and so that wouldn't be possible without your advocacy. So really appreciate that. My work on this bill goes back to 2016. I worked for Congressman Burgess in the House, and that was when I first got introduced to this policy, and it blew my mind that this was the law. And so yeah, I've wanted to get this fixed for a long time, and I was happy to get my boss to lead the Senate effort this time around. As I said, it's common sense. It's a no-brainer. We are closer than we've ever been before, right? And I think a lot of that credit goes to the administration for ASPE and Uehlecke for getting us those estimates, and then also to CMS for getting us that granular data that I think in the past was the obstacle with CBO. And with that information, CBO was able to produce a savings score, which we all knew was the case. We got the right data, and so we were successful this time around. So, we are, as far as the Senate goes, we're in a really good position with this policy. I've been working hand in glove with Chairman Grassley's team on the Health Committee. We're making a push for this to be included in the COVID-4 package, and I think we have a real solid shot at it. And I would say, as far as this policy goes in the rest of the year, if it doesn't make it into COVID-4 for whatever reason, I think it really is a question of it, not if, but when, because the bill is bipartisan, it's bicameral, it's solid policy, and it produces savings. So, but it's just so good for patients in the kidney community. So really jazzed and excited, and I hope we can get it across the finish line this time. So thanks, and back to you, Scott.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. I just really want to take a moment to really just thank Rob, Nick, and Alex, not only for joining us today, but also for all of their impressive and hard work over the last 18 plus months. As you can see, some of them have had years and years of experience, this, like many of the advocates on the call. They have answered countless emails from potential co-sponsors, from committees with questions, have sat on very tedious calls on technical assistance about this legislation. And, without them, we would not be where we are today. And I think that it's just great to be able to show their faces and show the work that they've been doing behind the scenes to really move this along. So thank you. And I know there are others also out there on both Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means Committee and Senate Finance Committee and co-sponsors that have been pushing behind the scenes as well. So it's really great. All right, and now I'd like to give you a little bit of a rundown and a reminder on the legislative process. So every one of the boxes here in the light purple shade is kind of the progress that we've already seen to date in the 116th Congress. And all of those in the dark blue background boxes are those that are still yet to be done. And this could be a little bit depressing seeing for folks looking at this and saying that's really all we've done. But it's really some of the process near the end is actually what takes the least amount of time. So, but what the action that happens at the beginning is some of the most monumental. So, for example, just getting a bill to be scored by CBO is huge. Having an opportunity to have a hearing and a markup, and a second markup in Energy and Commerce or in Ways and Means is also significant. So, we do see a clear path forward, but it is not a time to just kind of sit on our laurels and say we're so close that the ball is rolling. It's time to we can put up our hands and kind of see the process work. It's really time to kind of get into action. And you can see there are multiple steps where we may, through our various action centers at ASN, NKF, and Honor the Gift, we'll be calling on our advocates to contact their members of Congress to make sure that we can clear each and every one of these hurdles until we get to final passage and the president signs this bill into law. Now, what does make the 116th Congress different? We spoke about the support from Secretary Azar and the Department of Health and Human Services. The two OAC and ASPE reports really provided that blueprint for CBO to come to a conclusion of long-term savings to the Medicare program. So without Secretary Azar and folks in his inner circle pushing for that and having folks do the analysis and actuarial work behind the scenes really kind of helped push this forward in terms of showing a projected savings and allowing CBO to come to the same conclusion. Secondarily, this bipartisan champions in the House and the Senate. We have Kind and Burgess in the House and Durbin and Cassidy in the Senate. And as I spoke to, these are folks that have been kind of dogging this for the last 18 months and have spent a lot of time and energy and resources on this issue and want to see it done, want for their efforts to not be for naught. And they continue to push and continue to be our champions. And then third, the projected CBO score. I put a highlighter here. This is a game changer. What has held this issue up in the past has been the CBO score, but that will no longer be an issue due to CBO's projected savings and the roadmap it was provided by HHS. And then fourth, and certainly not least, is the united community of advocates. This has been a rallying cry for decades, and a concerted effort has been made in this Congress to take advantage of this momentum, and you have answered that call. And so we thank you for that united community that has been provided. And then on the next slide, this is the momentum that we have seen. We have seen Alex Azar first declare his public support back in March of 2019. HHS released its reports back in May of 2019, and we had a House bill introduced in December, an Energy and Commerce Health hearing in January, where Honor the Gift spokesman and board member of NKF, Dr. Matthew Cooper, testified on the community's behalf and as a clinician to the impact of this policy. The Senate introduced the bill in February, and we saw a markup in March. And then just a few weeks ago, CBO came out with a projected savings of $70 million over 10 years. And that is the momentum and where we are today. And this is an exciting story, but yet there is still more story to be written, and we are excited to have you all along for that. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to Barbara Murphy, who has been able to join us. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, for joining us, who will talk to being an immuno advocate on behalf of a clinician. Dr. Murphy?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, there you go. I'm having a lot of technical difficulties with Zoom over the last 2 days, which is bizarre after being on it for the last 3 months. So I want to thank everybody here for their continued support and advocacy for this bill. Some of the people I noticed on the participant list have been working on this for decades. Actually, I looked back on my AST president speech, and I said then, which was 2009, this is going to happen this year. It didn't, but it is going to happen this year. Really, the CBO, as I said, the CBO scoring is critical, and that's what held it up before. In fact, before what happened was it was not seen as a savings, it was seen as a cost, and there needed to be a pay for, which wound up pitching the dialysis community against the transplant community because the pay for was bundling, and created a whole other level of complexity in support of this, what is just a critical need for our patients. With regards to being an immuno advocate as a clinician, really, I think what I've found in the past is having the patient's stories that clearly demonstrate how this impacts our patients' lives, either their inability to get medication and therefore the impact on the survival of their graft, or its impact on access to transplantation. And having those stories and connecting those patients to groups like the NKF, ASN, AST, ASTS, etc. They speak louder than any way we could ever represent those stories. So, and you yourselves getting involved in the public policy committees, coming and talking about those patient stories, bringing your patients with you, etc. Incredibly important. It's really having people at the highest level understand the human impact to patients and humans that this lack of coverage has had. So please get involved. Please help us. We need to continue the momentum to get this over the line, because all of you can think probably right now of people you know that have been impacted negatively by lack of coverage for immunosuppression. The first person I think of is, and there's a number of questions that have come up by the panelists that I think are important. One is implications for other organs who do not get coverage, and what happens if you already have a kidney? Is this retroactive? Anybody want to take on those two questions?
Sure, we can cover that now. We also have a Q&A section at the end, but we'll definitely cover them in the Q&A. And just to quickly answer one, it is retroactive, so there is a grandfathering clause in the current legislation. But from here, I think as a clinician, it's important to get involved, and we've definitely seen that those personal stories do make a difference. And it's quite frustrating to clinicians as they treat patients and then run up against this policy that prohibits, the longevity of the kidney. But Also want to talk to it from a patient perspective, and I don't think there's anybody better to speak to it from a patient perspective as Kevin, as CEO of NKF, who interacts with patients on a daily basis and a patient himself. So Kevin?
Yeah, hi, thank you again. You know, as I mentioned earlier in my intro comments, I was a patient advocate. Because of my kidney transplant, I was a patient advocate before I became the CEO of the National Kidney Foundation. And I daily get to witness the power of the patient voice. And I can tell you there's nothing more valuable when it comes to bringing about change than when a group of dedicated patients share their stories and drive actions. And I appreciate Dr. Murphy saying it also is important for clinicians to bring their patient stories with them. It just screams a level of validity and support that moves Congress in ways that other things don't. So because you're joining this webinar today, you're involved already and you're looking for ways to get more engaged. So we're going to cover a couple of quick options. Contacting your members of Congress has really never been easier, particularly on this issue. NKF, Honor the Gift, ASN, we all have digital platforms you can use to send your legislators a message in support of the Immuno bill. You can find our page at the National Kidney Foundation to send a message to your representatives right now. You can get information on broader efforts at advocacy.kidney.org or just kidney.org and go to the advocacy page. After you send, but here's the trick, after you send your policymakers a message, you have even more opportunities to make an impact. You want to be able to reach out to all your friends and family members and neighbors through social media or speaking at the office or any other way you want to reach out to your network and let them know that they need to call in to Congress as well. You want to share your personal story on social media and tell them why they should care about the Immuno bill. And when you do, you're going to inspire other members to contact lawmakers in the same way that you are. It's going to build momentum. And then after that, this is important. You want to call your representative's office to make sure they got the message. You can even ask to speak to the healthcare staffer, two of whom you met today, to make sure they know about the Immuno bill. And when you call them, make sure to let them know that you're a constituent and that this is a common sense, non-controversial, nonpartisan bill that saves lives and saves money. It's not rocket science. It's going to be the easiest thing they've decided this year. And supporting the Immuno bill just really makes sense. So just to recap, there's a couple of ways. I want to challenge you to go to the action centers that I just mentioned, either at ASN or at the National Kidney Foundation at the Honor the Gift, and make sure your voice is heard. And again, for us, that's advocacy.kidney.org. Or even more simply, you can go to your phone and you can type in 345 and text Immuno. And right now, and you can do that, and you'll get a link to all of our action centers. It's real easy. It's going to look just like that. I don't know if you can see it. There you go. There you go. And you'll get a link to all the action centers for all three organizations. Nothing's more important than making your voice heard. And making your voice heard can make all the difference between this bill getting passed this year or not. So please stand with us as we finish this fight. Thank you. Back to you, Scott.
All right, and for some final words, Peter Maag.
Well, you know, after Kevin's plea to join 345 and type in Immuno, Kevin is a kidney transplant recipient. I see Kevin Fowler here being on the call. I see Amy being on the call. We have a tremendous outreach to many, many patients. But it's up to me to thank all of the participants for coming on and creating this, we call it the Transplant Village, and move things forward. So on behalf of everyone here and the Honor the Gift Coalition, as well as our friends at the National Kidney Foundation and the American Society of Nephrology, I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us. We'll be moving into Q&A in a second. I want to give an extra special thank you to the esteemed guests who joined us today to share their insights into the advocacy process. Neil Uehlecke at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Rob Butora from the Senator Bill Cassidy's office, Alex Eveland from Ron Kine's office, Dr. Barbara Murphy from the American Society of Nephrology. Thank you, Barbara, for joining us. Kevin Longino, the CEO of the National Kidney Foundation, Zimmerman from the National Kidney Foundation, and then our moderator, Scott Leezer, who has been tirelessly fighting for making this happening over many, many years as well. I also don't want to miss an opportunity to recognize the 32 the 32 member organizations of the Honor the Gift Coalition, from patient and professional groups to OPOs and donor advocacy organizations. These groups have been invaluable in our efforts over the last 18 months. It has been an honor and a privilege to watch the kidney and transplant community unite over the last 18 months in support of this critical piece of legislation. This moment has been a long time coming, but I truly believe that this is our year to finally get this done and pass the Immuno bill. Thank you for joining the fight. Now I'd like to hand it over to Scott to help us run our Q&A session. And thank you so much for the comments in the comment box. And thank you very much for the questions in the Q&A function. Over to you, Scott.
Great. I'll take a question from Kevin first, who had asked, if the Immuno bill is passed, how will this impact patients having an option of brand name or generic transplant medications? I feel like the best person potentially to answer this question is Troy from NKF. Troy, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It should not have any impact because under Medicare Part B, I'm trying to start the video, I'm sorry. Under Medicare Part B, the transplant physician is able to provide the specific drug regimen that they think works best for that patient. So whether that's a generic or a brand medication, it should not have any impact on their ability to get whatever medication meets their needs, best meets their needs. There's not really a cost consideration in that regard.
Great. Now, on the question of from George, had two questions, and I think Rob Butora would be a great person to answer these. Is Congress clear of the savings for paying for these pharmaceutical drugs rather than going back on dialysis? What is your take in terms of, do you feel like this message is resonating in Congress? And then also, how many co-sponsors do we have in the Senate? Rob, are you with us still? All right. I can go ahead and try to take that one too. I think that it is becoming clear to Congress. We have, I know that members of ASN and NKF and Honor the Gift have been hitting the trail hard, Capitol Hill hard, virtually, of course, after the CBO score to try to gain as many co-sponsors. And we had 4 added just last week in the House and in the Senate. So we're really making that argument clear to Congress that this is going to be a cost saver. And in the Senate, we have 11 co-sponsors, which is a great number. But if we were able to push that up even further to 15 or 20, even more reason to show that we have broad bipartisan support, and then this is a no-brainer for the Senate Finance Committee to move. Alex, would you like to take the question on if there is a bill to be added to a larger must-pass legislation, any target legislation that's out there, Alex Eveland?
Yeah, so I think Rob had mentioned that there's the potential for another COVID package here in the next month or so. The House passed a COVID, the HEROES Act, which was our attempt at another COVID relief package a couple months ago, and the Senate is working on something similar right now. So although it's not for sure, we're hoping that the Senate will bring something up in the next package, which would obviously be a big comprehensive bill for specific to COVID. But we think, given that this will save money, that could be a vehicle for our bill as well. So hopefully that would make it a pretty easy process, I think, to get this passed. So that's the I think our top priority. And if that doesn't happen, we'll look towards more of the traditional path for a standalone vote on just this bill.
Great. Now, Nick, I don't mean to give you the hard question, but in the question of medication coverage for other solid organ transplant recipients, maybe you can speak to the unique coverage that Congress has provided to kidney transplant patients and just the impact that it has and the magnitude on the Medicare program. Nick?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll speak to it as much as I can. You know, I think that the way that the Medicare program works and the way that the ESRD benefit was added, you know, I think it only made sense that we continued to that the ESRD benefit continued into transplant as well, as a Medicare benefit. You know, I think that then that's the case for all beneficiaries that suffer from ESRD, regardless of age or participation in the Medicare programs. You know, kidneys do make up for a large majority of the organs that are transplanted. And so, you know, I think when we're talking about support for immunosuppressive drugs for the lifetime of the patient, you know, I think no matter what, I mean, while we're here talking about kidneys, I think that they're, you know, I can speak to myself, I would generally support having this for all organs. This is it's a good policy. Not to, if you even want to take it to the next level, it just makes, it's a common sense goal to essentially continue and monitor our investments, right? If we're going for each transplant, why for a very cheap amount of dollars, why would we not want to maintain those investments in those patients and human beings that are being transplanted? So I know I kind of danced around. I generally do think that we should be headed in that direction.
Let me add one thing. What's unique about this is, you know, what Nick was saying with the, you know, the fact that the ESRD kidney benefit under Medicare is not based on age or any other disability. So that makes kidney transplants unique. I mean, remember, this bill is regarding Medicare coverage and Medicare transplants. And so for other solid organs, if they're covered by Medicare, that's because that individual has Medicare eligibility based on age or SSDI, so disability. And this is unique in that, you know, these patients lose their Medicare for no other reason other than the fact that they received a transplant, and, you know, within 36 months, they lose that coverage. And then, you know, this, as Nick said, this is really a lot of this. I mean, this is the right thing to do, of course, but it's also an investment question because, as CBO has shown, and you know, common sense tells you, it's less expensive to cover the medications than you know, than lose a transplant and return to dialysis.
Great. There's a question about, is there a one-pager we can send to our congressman? I know that we have a one-pager at the Honor the Gift Coalition. I'm sure that there are one-pagers available at the National Kidney Foundation and the ASN. I will get with the folks on the call here afterwards and see if we can package those all three together, and you can pick which one you'd like to send out to your congressman as we distribute the recording. There was a question about Native tribal nations stepping up their support. We have had some representatives from the Native tribal nations, particularly out of Oklahoma, who have been incredibly helpful in kind of navigating what the Indian Health Service implications are, and also indicating just what the minority community's impact on this policy is. So that answers one question here. All right, I think with that, we are getting pretty close to the end of the webinar. And so again, I'd like to thank you for joining. We will be sending out the recording to any of the registrants. I know that we have about 150 or so that have joined us live. There was about 400 who have registered. So please feel free to share this. And if you have any additional questions, here are the contact information for folks to get in touch. Please use the 345 Immuno text message to be able to take action today. And we look forward to continuing this advocacy effort with you, and as a community, stronger because of it. And thank you again for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.